What is up? Welcome to another edition of the Utilization Report Debrief. I am Marcas Grant, joined by Dwain McFarland. And Dwain, I know we got plenty of football stuff to talk about, but I was scrolling social media over the weekend. I saw you, Chris Allen, many others at the wedding of our friend and colleague Ian Harditz. So first, congratulations to Ian and his bride Julia. But looked like a good time was had by all at the wedding.
It was a great time. It was great to get to hang out with Daigle as well as Chris, obviously. But yeah, it was a great day to be great, you might say, for Ian and Julia. Kings stay kings, queens stay queens. All those cool things, that we love from Ian. That he says, like, man, and just two really cool families. Like, there was a lot of cool stuff. The mom and Julia's two aunts got up and sang a song, but it was a parody of an old song, but it was about their wedding. That was so cool. There were some different Jewish things going on that I hadn't really experienced before. Julia and Ian being thrown up in their chairs. Good thing Ian comes, he's got a football background. So all of his high school buddies that he played football with and college buddies that he played football with, they were the people doing the lifting. So I felt pretty comfortable about it. And yeah, afterwards there were festivities that included competing, with those guys. So I was trash talking and I lost in some events to them. I did win I won at ping pong.
That's cool.
So that was good. But yeah, it was a good time. It was a great time. And yes, super happy, man, for Julia and Ian. Like they're a perfect match and just two great people.
Absolutely. No, that was awesome. I enjoyed seeing the photos over the weekend. So congratulations to Mr. and Mrs. Harditz. I guess we can officially say that now. And best of luck to them, certainly going
I
forward.
have lots of great stories now that I will slowly reveal about Ian.
Oh,
I
this is
can't
great.
tell you when they're going to happen, but it's hard to embarrass or get Ian to blush or anything. So we're going to give it a shot, though. We're going to work some of these things in over time.
This is great. See, this is a tease for you all to keep tuning into all the shows here at Fantasy Life, so you can find out little tidbits.
I worked the room for all of you guys. I met every friend I could from Ian's past, and I spent 10, 15 minutes with all of them, trying to hang out and hear all the funny stories about Mr. Harditz.
Oh, this is awesome. And the ones that maybe don't make air, I want to hear them at the expo when we connect in Canton. That would be great. All right. We got stuff to talk about, though. We're going to start diving into some depth chart questions today. We will look at the AFC. Next week, we will dive into the NFC. So basically asking some questions about each of the teams and trying to figure out how things are going to shake out with certain parts of everybody's roster and how it's going to help you when it comes to your fantasy life for this season. Of course, it helps that OTAs are underway this week. We got mandatory mini camps in June. You may have noticed that because you're probably seeing tweets come across your feed, either slow motion video of guys doing things or tweets about guys slimming down. I saw this morning that Lamar Jackson is down about 25 pounds from where he played.
Lamar Jackson?
Lamar Jackson, apparently.
I don't know that that's the news I want to hear. Lamar Jackson, is not a huge human being.
Intentionally down to 205 pounds, 25 pounds less than his 2022 weight. Okay, so 15 pounds or lower than last season when he played at 215. So he's down 10 pounds from last year, 25 pounds from a couple of years ago. The word in Baltimore is that this Slim Lamar could be even faster than the one we've seen in years past. So do with that what you will. That is the report from Diana Rossini. So yeah. I'm sure we will get to the Ravens too at some point during this run here. But let's start in Buffalo, where the Bills very much overhauled a lot of things with their passing game. Stephon Diggs is gone. Gabe Davis is gone. They draft Keon Coleman. Josh Allen, so still the guy at the helm of this offense. But when you're looking at these targets, how have you decided the pecking order is going to go for the Bills?
Yeah, and folks can go check this out. We've got the projections up over at fantasylife.com, and so you guys can essentially see, where I'm at on these things, but obviously going to be continuing, to monitor. But I did not assign a wide receiver 1 status to the team. So the way that our projection model works is, you look across the depth chart, and then it's going to use, the player's 3-year average, more weighted to their last season, but it will also regress you to an NFL average based on your order in your pecking order on the depth chart. And so I've got Keon Coleman listed as a wide receiver 2. I've got Khalil Shakir listed as a wide receiver 2. I'm assuming based on what we've heard so far, those two guys will be playing on the outside. And then when they go to 11 personnel, it'll be Curtis Samuel coming on the field to play in the slot. But it may not be that way. We may hear that Curtis Samuel's playing outside. It may be more of a rotation of all those guys getting to play outside and inside. We don't know for sure yet. I think the tricky thing with this one, Marcus, is that really, when we had Matt Harmon on, he talked about Keon Coleman really being a big slot guy, really worried about him playing outside. Well, Curtis Samuel has been more of a slot underneath player, did spend some time on the outside in Carolina, where he had a pretty successful season, just got some really bad quarterback play one year. So, I don't want to completely limit Curtis Samuel to the slot, but then Khalil Shakir also mostly played in the slot last season. So we've got three guys that have played from the slot, and they can't all play that position. And also, we've got two tight ends. You've got Dawson Knox and you've got Dalton Kincaid. Dalton Kincaid gets the lineup in the slot quite a bit as well. So very interested to see what we're hearing from training camp, how it's going for Keon Coleman on the outside. But we would love to know the two wide receivers we think that are going to be on the field the most. My bet today is Keon Coleman and Khalil Shakir with Curtis Samuel in the slot, but we'll have to continue to adjust. I did go back and look, Marcus, did a little research just on what did it look like over the last two seasons without Stephon Diggs on the field for the Bills. Since he didn't really miss games, I had to do it at the play level. Here's the targets per route run. James Cook, 31%. Dalton Kincaid, 29%. Khalil Shakir, 19%. Dawson Knox, 18%. Gabe Davis, no longer with the team, was at 16%. Now, it's not a huge sample because Stephon Diggs doesn't really miss that many plays, but it's what we have. So the biggest question that I kind of, had about my projections as I did, more and more research as I was going was maybe I'm too low on James Cook, like as far as his targets. Because I think there's potential. We know James Cook's a good receiving back. We know he's one of these backs that can work down the field, be a mismatch versus linebackers and safeties. He dropped some touchdowns last year.
Yeah.
But that can just be unlucky, man. What if James Cook didn't drop? I think it was 4 touchdowns that Ian charted, basically, that he dropped.
Mm-hmm.
Think how much more excited people would be about James Cook in fantasy going into this year. And he's still, a round 5 pick right now, in your best ball drafts. But if he caught those 4 touchdowns, how much higher would he be going in your draft? And then you get this data point of, man, when Stephon Diggs wasn't on the field, 31% targets per route run, and the fact that we're not sure who the leading receiver is. Like maybe we're underestimating James Cook.
Maybe we are. And I think to your point about drops, and we've talked about it. I know Matt Harmon's talked about drops don't really matter. And I think, we've talked about how I think drops matter in the context of when sort of they happen. Like when you see a guy have drops in an island game, right? If it's Thursday night, if it's Sunday night or Monday night, where that's the only game everybody's watching, drops seem magnified. And I think for James Cook, when you're dropping touchdowns, it definitely feels magnified. If he has a drop and it's whatever, it's 1st and 10 at their own 35-yard line, it's a drop and it sucks, but it doesn't seem quite as crucial as like, oh, he had a wide open lane to score a touchdown and he dropped it. And those are the ones that sort of stick with us. The thing I look at though with this team, and I'm sort of with you on not having a clear number 1 wide receiver, and I know everybody's big on Dalton Kincaid and he's shooting up draft boards. I have drafted Josh Allen a couple of times I've done it in mock drafts. I've done it in a couple of best ball drafts. I'm starting to do it with a little more hesitation just because I know the rushing upside is there. I know the touchdown upside is there, but do the passing numbers come down just because they don't have those targets anymore? They don't have Stephon Diggs. And say what you want about Gabe Davis. He was good to pop off for a couple of big games, at least, once or twice a season. Should we have a little bit more hesitation about thinking that Josh Allen can be a QB1 or at least a top 3 quarterback just because he is sort of working in a new offense with a whole lot of guys that he might not be quite as familiar with now?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. But I think whenever you look at what we got last year from Joe Brady once he took over as the play caller, how involved Josh Allen became in the run game, started getting more use in the design run game, and then his scramble, percentage also went up. That could just come down to variance, right, over the sample size. But the interesting part to me was that, the investment, right, that they put in getting him touches in that designed area. And so I think he's going to get the rushing touchdowns. I think he's still going to get his rushing yards. But I do think there is a question, Marcus, about the ceiling. So previously with Stephon Diggs, it's like, Would we really be surprised if Josh Allen threw for 5,000 yards and ran for 700 and scored 10 rushing touchdowns? And the answer was no. But now I would be surprised if Josh Allen threw for 5,000 yards, right? We'd be pretty happy probably with like 4,000 yards passing. But I think he's going to be so good in the rushing department that it's just going to make it too hard, Marcus, for him to not finish in the top 3 quarterbacks. I think there's a potential argument there. Should he really be the hands down QB1? But they're all starting to group a little closer together. So Josh Allen has slid down boards a little bit. So he goes middle of the third to end of the third round. Then you quickly get Lamar Jackson and Jalen Hurts coming off the board right there, usually around the turn. Sometimes Lamar will slide down round 4, but now you got Mahomes climbing the board because of what they've done, for their offense. So it's really that cluster. And I think just kind of mixing them up, I still feel good about taking any one of those quarterbacks. And if you guys didn't get to hear Jonathan Fuller, who was on with myself and Marcus last week, one of the strategies he talked about, early in best ball season is he really does like targeting, those elite quarterbacks in rounds 3, 4, and 5. You get CJ Stroud starting to come into the mix, right, in that round 5 conversation. But I'm still good with all of those guys. I'm very willing to take them. And you do get to a spot in drafts where you have more questions about the running backs, some of which we'll be talking about here pretty quickly, and some of the other wide receivers. So, yeah, I still think I'm still good with Josh Allen, but I do think there's a little bit taken off of the ceiling here unless someone surprises us. 2 quick things, though, like the James Cook thing. What you said was so perfect, that it's where his drops came from. Like, they were huge plays. But at the same time, it's also, you saw he had the ability to get open on these deep routes down the field, on these wheel routes, on these bullet routes, things that most other running backs can't do. So even though he dropped the touchdowns at the same time, it's also maybe the real signal we should be paying attention to is no, James Cook really is different as a receiver, as a running back. That's plays that really you only see 3 or 4 running backs in the league making, getting those kind of targets. I don't want to say consistently, but more often than the other running backs in the NFL. So I think James Cook, there's some potential value here. I'm not like all in on him. And then the Dalton Kincaid thing, you mentioned it. He is shooting up draft boards. My thought process has become, Marcus, when I take Josh Allen in round 3, I just take Dalton Kincaid in round 4. I don't really mess around with it, to be honest, because it's at a spot where I like Dalton Kincaid as much as all the other options that I could take. And so then I don't mind reaching half a round on ADP. If I feel like I'm leaving something really great on the board there, then it's like, okay, maybe I shouldn't. But I'm pretty much, if I want Dalton Kincaid, I just go ahead and take him. I don't do it every time I take Josh Allen, but I've done it several times. And you mentioned it. Kincaid is climbing. Like he's an end of round 4, early round 5 pick now.
Yeah, and I think if we start getting reports that it's taking Keon Coleman some time to come along or something like that, I think he's going to continue to move up. So
the data I shared, I've gone Josh Allen, Dalton Kincaid, also with the plan of knowing I wanted to take James Cook in round 5. And so I've done that stack multiple times.
Yeah. By the way, with drops don't matter until they stop throwing you the ball. If you drop the ball enough that they stop throwing it to you, then the drops matter. So that's
and Deontay Johnson has proven, as long as you keep getting open, like they pretty much are just going to
keep throwing you the ball. Exactly. Over to Cincinnati, and Zach Moss had a really good year last year in Indianapolis. He comes and replaces Joe Mixon in the Bengals backfield. They still have Chase Brown there, and I won't say there's 2 schools of thought. I mean, I think everybody sort of likes Zach Moss and the opportunity, but there are a lot of people, and I'll admit that I'm one of them, that sit back and say, hey, let's not completely forget about Chase Brown. Dwayne, I feel like Moss is the RB1, but how close is that gap between him and Brown right now?
Yeah, I think this is a really big one because we've got a quality offense as long as Joe Burrow is healthy. I know there's been the speculation around his wrist, but I think reading between the tea leaves, I mean, the dude's out there throwing. So really no reading between the tea leaves. He's out there throwing. He's fine. It sounds like the biggest risk for Burrow is falling. And when you go to brace, yourself for a fall with that wrist again, how much pain is that going to cause him? Is there potential for re-injury, that sort of thing? But if this is the Bengals offense that we've come to know with a healthy Joe Burrow under center, then, getting to have the potential running back 1 from that situation, this is huge. This is huge to understand. And it is Zach Moss that's going off the board first right now in fantasy drafts. You can usually get him, Marcus, in round, 8, 9 in that range. And then a couple of rounds later, Chase Brown is coming off the board. I think that's probably right, the order that people are taking it in, but I'm not hyper confident in it. Zach Moss did play well last year. Really, the best football Zach Moss has ever played happened last year. And it was so good that it kind of hindered Jonathan Taylor even once he was back. And we were already a, hey, Jonathan Taylor show. And Zach Moss was kind of like, I'm still playing good. And so that kind of limited what we got from Jonathan Taylor there for a bit. But it's one data point for Zach Moss. Like the rest of his career has not been very good. So these things can be tricky. It wouldn't surprise me if by like week 5 or 6, Chase Brown's actually the starter. It wouldn't surprise me if week 1, Chase Brown's the starter. It wouldn't surprise me if this is a 1A, 1B situation, right? Not an RB1 versus an RB2 kind of scenario. So I've really been mixing in both backs. I'm with you. My expectation, the way we've got this projected, the way we've got it ranked, is Zach Moss as the lead guy. But I'm really drafting both of these players. Chase Brown offers more explosive playmaking upside, but has a lot to learn as a back. Like he doesn't have a natural feel for the game, working all the nuances of all the different types of zone runs and power runs that you're going to be dealing with. Like he's shown the flashes, but can he be more consistent? And I know the coaches will at least feel like Zach Moss, even though he may not be as explosive, he's going to go out and do what he's supposed to on each play. So I think until proven otherwise, you have to think of Moss as the guy with the slight lead. But if Chase Brown figures it out, I do think there's potentially more upside with like his bull case.
Yeah, no, I agree with you on that. And I think the thing about it, and I'm with you, I'm drafting both of these guys mostly because the ADP is pretty favorable. So
Yes.
there's not a whole lot of risk involved because of where you're getting them. And so, if it turns out that you draft Zach Moss and Chase Brown sort of takes over, it's not like you've spent a whole lot of draft capital there. So I'm sort of in with both these guys at their current ADP. Look at the pass catchers, though, there in Cincinnati, because it's got an interesting kind of group there, right? They go out and they draft Jermaine Burton, certainly higher than I think a lot of us were anticipating, just because of all the talk of the off-field issues there. They have Trenton Irwin, they have Charlie Jones. They signed Mike Gesicki, who basically spent the early part of his career being a big slot receiver before Mike McDaniel tried to turn him into a blocker there in Miami. Do you have a handle on who you think is going to be the starting slot receiver? And I guess the addendum to that question is, how much potentially will Ja'Marr Chase eat into that opportunity?
Well, Ja'Marr Chase obviously caps a lot of things, and then T. Higgins as well. When those two guys are out there, they're going to get theirs. But I mean, we're talking about an offense that is it's been a pass first offense, for the last several years, especially when Joe Burrow is healthy. They've been very willing to throw the ball more than the league average, pretty much in all game scenarios, all game scripts. So that's a big positive. And we've seen Tyler Boyd, have flashes, but he just didn't have that big playmaking ability. So Boyd was one of these kind of slot wide receivers that was really uber dependent on the volume. Everyone's dependent on volume, but Boyd was one of those guys. He wasn't going to give you a lot of big plays beyond basically what was there. And so it's hard to get high-end fantasy production from that kind of profile when the targets aren't coming their way at a high enough rate. But man, Jermaine Burton does have that big playability. So you could see him being a guy that even, Marcus, if he ended up with like a 14, 15, 16% target share for the season, you could see a scenario where he has some really big games. And we've seen Ja'Marr Chase and T. Higgins struggle to stay on the field. Like it's like one of them is, typically dealing with something, right, that they're having to battle through. Not saying that's going to be the case. Injury is very hard to predict. As soon as you say that, this will be the year that neither one of those guys deal with any injury. But if one of those guys go down and Jermaine Burton already has the value as the slot receiver, man, like you could get some real production out of Jermaine Burton, in some different spots. There might be 3 or 4 weeks of the season where he's really graded more like a wide receiver 2 with wide receiver 1 upside. So I've given the nod to Jermaine Burton, but we don't know for sure. I mean, it could be a rotation of Trenton Irwin. We've got Charlie Jones, who you mentioned, and you mentioned Gesicki, who's really another tight end that's better operating out of the slot. So a lot of times we see teams play, the number 3 target by committee, and that's what we could have here. But if I'm putting a chip anywhere, it's definitely on Jermaine Burton, and that's where the market's at as well. I mean, he's the guy that if it goes your way, like you really get paid off big. Like if it's Trenton Irwin and it goes his way, like I don't know what the ceiling is. If it's Charlie Jones, I mean, I don't know. I don't want to discount those guys, but I feel like with Jermaine Burton, if you get it right and it works out for you, that it could potentially win you some games, especially in best ball where you don't have to decide which weeks you've got to play Jermaine Burton. If it's a redraft league, like you're not going to feel super comfortable about Burton until he's proven it to you early in the season. And it might take an injury to one of the other 2 guys to want to get him in the lineup.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing with Burton is this is where you go back to the talent profile because the landing spot was one where you mentioned they're pass happy. They have a very good quarterback. You're not concerned about the offense or anything like that. This is where the talent profile comes in because Burton was
Yep.
a guy who, if all things were equal, might have been one of the first receivers off the board. Like, I don't know that he goes above, Harrison or anybody like
Had
that,
a chance
but
to be a round one guy
he's
though
certainly a
if
round one
everything goes
guy.
right. Yeah.
Right, exactly. So I mean, I think that tells you how people feel about his talent. It's just can he keep his head straight? So I think that's why it is worth. I'm with you. It's worth sort of putting a chip on him being the guy to win that opportunity. And I think the Bengals are going to give him every chance to win it until he proves he's not worthy. And I think that's worth kind of taking the swing of it there.
I will say when you take Burrow and say you've got Chase, I don't mind with my last pick in a best ball draft. When Burton's gone and you missed on him, occasionally like swinging at one of these other guys. I would prefer to do that like as training camp goes along a little bit because like we could get a surprise cut right with somebody that we didn't expect to be cut from the team. So you want to be careful. But I've definitely mixed in the other names. I haven't taken Charlie Jones, but I've taken Trenton Irwin. But it wouldn't surprise me like if Charlie Jones is more like that underneath kind of slot guy.
Mm-hmm.
Jermaine Burton's more of like the vertical slot. So I mean, there's a lot of ways it could play out. But like you mentioned, like Burton's the one with the most upside.
We are heading into the final rounds of the NBA playoffs, but there is still plenty of time to get in on the action with our partners at DraftKings Sportsbook. Right now, all new customers who deposit just $5 will get a no sweat bet up to $1,500. That's right. New customers who deposit just $5 get a no sweat bet up to $1,500. DraftKings has got something for the returning customers as well. Score a no sweat NBA bet. Now, if sports betting is not yet available in your state, don't worry. You can still join in on all the fun with DraftKings Daily Fantasy and have the shot to win cash prizes. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now. New customers use our promo code DEBRIEF and deposit just $5 and get a no sweat bet up to $1,500. That's promo code DEBRIEF only at DraftKings Sportsbook. In Denver,
Yeah. You
lot
tell
of
me here, Marcus. Just
there's
take it away, man.
so much confusion here, right? I mean, there are knowns, there are unknowns, there are known unknowns, there are unknown unknowns. I think the Broncos are a lot of unknown unknowns because at quarterback, right? They have right now Bo Nix, Jarrett Stidham, and Zach Wilson, which I mentioned to you before the show. You wrote it as MILF Hunter in the show sheet, and I almost choked on my coffee. But so that's at quarterback. I guess let's just go position by position, right? Because at quarterback, it's Nix, it's Stidham, it's Wilson. I would think it's Bo Nix that gets the first crack at this, but I guess there's really no way to be sure, right?
Yeah, it's funny on many depth charts. I wouldn't feel this way about Bo Nix, but on this one, I do think like it's probably him, and he's got that. He's that short intermediate game kind of passing guy, and that's what Sean Payton likes. He likes that timing offense. Jarrett Stidham, I think, is the backup. Zach Wilson's been so terrible, like he's just off my radar until proven otherwise, kind of thing. But I think Nix is the favorite, to start. And I've drafted him, a few times, especially, hey, we just talked about Cincinnati. Your week 17 stack with Cincinnati is Denver. So, I mean, I've definitely got some exposure to Nix, but not someone I'm super comfortable with like all the time, getting obviously we just don't know what the offense is going to look like, but there is still questions like, will he be the starter week 1?
Yeah. So that sort of flows into everything else, right? So once we figure out the starting quarterback, presumably Nix, we'll see. Then we get to the running backs. I, this feels like one where there's not going to be a true starter, right? Like the starter will be the guy who's on the field for the first play of the game. Like you are the starter, but there's not going to be a designation, I think, regularly. You got Javonte Williams. You've got Jaleel McLaughlin, who we saw pop several times during the season. Samaje Perine, who comes in and seems to have a role in the offense, even if it's not necessarily one that we can lean on in fantasy week after week. There's Blake Watson.
Estime too. Yeah, I left off the show sheet.
Estime as well. I just feel like this is going to be one where Sean Payton is not going to do us any favors with what happens in this backfield.
So with this one, my take right now is it's Javonte Williams versus Estime for the early down work. That's the camp battle, right? Then it's going to be Jaleel McLaughlin versus Blake Watson. Sean Payton told us that. He told us they're both really vying for the same role. And Sean Payton's known for this, right? Remember Trenton Cannon? I mean, we've had all these. He likes to get three backs involved, and he has typically a specialty back that's really good in the passing game. He didn't trust Jaleel McLaughlin last year in his past pro duties, so be really interested to see like is McLaughlin coming along from that perspective, because that was probably the biggest limiting factor on McLaughlin last year. And Perine gets those snaps. So that's the guy they do trust, when it's long down in distance and you're probably getting a blitz. You're going to see man coverage. They're going to try to heat it up, especially if you've got a Bo Nix or an unproven quarterback like Jarrett Stidham under center. So it's going to probably be a rotation, and I don't know how good the offense overall is going to be, but I've more often than not just taken some swings on the later round guys here. Mostly so far McLaughlin, but really just watching to see what happens. I don't like taking him a ton, because hearing that quote from Sean Payton that those two guys are battling for the same job, like it could be Blake Watson over him this year.
Yeah.
So McLaughlin, though, the thing is, like, he was so efficient last year. Like, he was a very explosive playmaker. He created a lot after the catch, created a lot after, contact, those sort of things. So there's a lot to like with McLaughlin, but I honestly just know that this is going to be a three-way split, and I can't even tell you for sure which three it's going to be. I've been it's interesting. Like early on in best ball drafts, Marcus, I was interested in Javonte Williams, but the more quotes and comments that we've heard coming out of, Denver and Sean Payton, like the less and less confidence that I have in him. My original take on him was, look, this is a guy that 2 years ago we were super excited about. We knew he was going to have to recover from a gruesome injury last year, and that went about the way you would expect. He was not as explosive as he was before, but there was a stretch where he really became the lead back for the Broncos. And so my thought process was, look, like this is a guy we really liked, and now he's a full year removed from all the injury stuff. And like if I had to today pick who I think leads the Broncos backfield, I think it is still Javonte Williams, but it's not as strong as I felt about it like 4 to 6 weeks ago. And I think the market's reflecting that. Javonte slipped a little bit, in his ADP and best ball drafts.
Yeah, and I was saying just from a personal level, like I loved Javonte coming out of college. I really wanted him to go to a spot where I thought he could prosper. I was disappointed initially when he got drafted by the Broncos, because I just knew he was going to have to split opportunities there. The injury certainly has not helped things, and now it's about as muddled a backfield as you could expect. I have been very hesitant to really click on anybody in that backfield, just because there's no, as you mentioned, there's no real clarity. Perine seems to have the pass catch. I can't even say that. I was gonna say he seems like the pass catching gig sort of.
They have two. They have two passing game roles there. That's the challenge. You have the 2-minute back, and then you have the long down and distance back. And like this is kind of Peyton's been notorious for that. Every once in a while, he will give the full package to someone, but it usually takes an injury. Like if all his guys are healthy, like he really does divide it up. So you're definitely dealing with some uncertainty. And so I think I've been mixing in Javonte a little bit. I don't mind taking Perine in the last round every once in a while, but I actually want to get a little bit more clarity on what's going on, because I'm just worried some of these guys might not be active.
Right.
And so that makes it tricky. I'm very willing to embrace uncertainty in best ball, and I think you need to do that. But like with this one, like I can't even tell you who's going to be active right now on game day. Like my favorite is still Javonte being out there, but outside of that, I'm not sure.
Yeah, that is going to be the question that haunts us, I think, for a lot of the year. Wide receiver: Courtland Sutton, Troy Franklin, Marvin Mims, Josh Reynolds, Tim Patrick. I think all of these guys are going to be on the field semi-regularly, I think, this year. I mean, at the moment, Courtland Sutton is the closest thing to, he's the wide receiver one in name, right? He's the guy that's sort of the lead of that group. But I have a feeling we're going to see all these guys, to the point that it's just going to be a headache to deal with any of them. Best ball is maybe the only way I would touch this group. I don't think I'd do anything with them in a redraft league, because it's just going to be really, really hard to figure out. Again, going back to the quarterback issue, right? Is it Bo Nix? Is it Jarrett Stidham? Is it somehow potentially Zach Wilson? This just seems like a complete nightmare for redraft. At least best ball, I can sort of make a case for taking one of these guys.
Yeah, and I'm with you. I think the thing is they're also cheap, right? And we just know how every year things that we don't expect happen. And so when you get guys that are priced the way these guys are, I've been buying into them, because I think you're right that they're all going to get playing time. And we saw this last year with Sean Payton. I think that Courtland Sutton is obviously the guy most locked into probably playing most snaps. But then it's Troy Franklin versus Marvin Mims Jr. battling. And if they're not good enough, you've got this, the veteran Josh Reynolds, who's feels like he's been standing in the way of, someone for, I can't even remember how long now. He did it with the Rams, then he, last season did it, and we weren't able to get the full effect of, Jameson Williams. So Reynolds is one of these guys. He's shown, if the receivers are struggling, the younger guys are struggling, like he can get in their way and keep them from getting playing time. So the uncertainty, though, is what's pushing them all down, in price. Now, Troy Franklin fell to round 4 of the NFL draft. There's not a lot of round 4 wide receivers that ultimately end up breaking out, but he was a guy that was once thought of as a round 1 pick, right? Now, it takes a lot of teams passing on him multiple times for him to fall from round 1 to round 4. Whenever I see a guy that goes way higher in the NFL draft, Marcus, than what we expected, that just takes one team. But when a guy falls way down the board, like what we saw from Troy Franklin, that takes multiple teams deciding multiple times in the draft, nope, we're not taking him. And so that is a worry with Troy Franklin, but you get him near the end of drafts. And then the same thing for Marvin Mims Jr., who did flash last year. So I'm not really messing with Josh Reynolds or Tim Patrick in drafts. But would it surprise me if they stand in the way of Troy Franklin and Marvin Mims and them not actually being able to break out? Yeah, I mean, that wouldn't surprise me at all. I think the guy that I draft the most out of all of this mess, Marcus, is honestly Greg Dulcich. Dulcich is a guy we really liked last year. He got hurt. Adam Trautman is not a lead tight end. Adam Trautman is not a high-end target earner. I feel like Greg Dulcich is the one that I'm like, man, won't surprise me if he's at 65, 70% route participation. And last year in the preseason, they were really using him a lot. He was staying on the field quite often. He was the lead guy. So that's the biggest one that I'm putting a chip on right now is Dulcich. He's the one that I think that as people come to their senses, he'll be a late round tight end pick in more best ball drafts than not. Right now, he's going undrafted.
Well, I mean, remember, this was a guy that, I mean, he started his career, was hurt, at the beginning of his rookie season, but when he got on the field, immediately walked into a big situation. Now, mind you, that was not with Sean Payton. And then last year, he was hurt for pretty much the entire season, so we didn't really get to see him. But I think talent-wise, I do like him. Now, I'm curious whether Trautman gets more of a runway just because he has familiarity with Peyton. I don't know, but I do like Dulcich. I think he's worth kind of taking a swing at the end of drafts as well. Over to Indianapolis, Jonathan Taylor is the undisputed RB1 there. The question is, who do we want behind him? I'm old enough to remember last year when Taylor was going to miss time at the beginning of the season between injury and contract situation, that we were all like, Evan Hull is the guy. And then, Hull got hurt quickly, and then it turned into the Zach Moss show. But Hull is back. There's Tyler Goodson. There's Trey Sermon. I would tend to lean toward Evan Hull, or do you have somebody else that you think could take some of those opportunities?
Yeah, I lean to Evan Hull right now as the running back too, but definitely one we're going to have to pay attention to. And mainly because, look, we've all done the Trey Sermon thing long enough. So it's like, Trey Sermon, is dead to me until proven otherwise. Like he's got to prove it. And then Tyler Goodson, like that doesn't do a lot for me. And so it's as much about the other two guys as it is about Evan Hull, which isn't always great. That's not always optimal. So to tell you how confident I am in this, like I gave Evan Hull 10% of the rushing attempts. Typically a running back two, you're looking at someone between 20 and 30% of the carries. I only gave him 10%. I've got Jonathan Taylor at 65%, and then I've got 5% to Tyler Goodson. I've got 2% to Trey Sermon. But remember, there's a big gap there because I had to leave room for design rushing attempts for who, Anthony Richardson, who's really going to be the running back two in this offense. So we're really looking at who's the running back three. But right now, I would say that it's Evan Hull. But the big question really is like if Jonathan Taylor went down, right? That's that contingency value. Hull is the guy I'm going with. But again, going to really have to pay attention to what we're hearing from camp.
Yeah. Side note, the Niners have had a poor track record of drafting guys named Trey Sermon, Trey Lance. Just hasn't worked out for them the last few years. Whatever. The Jaguars obviously look like they want to limit Travis Etienne. At least they certainly did last year. They trying to prevent him from getting overworked and potentially injured. Do you think they do that again this year? I know they've talked about Tank Bigsby having a bigger role in the offense, but Dwayne, this time of year, coaches say a lot of things. We get a lot of quotes. And then once they get into the thick of the
Yeah.
season, it doesn't necessarily pan out that way. But are you buying into this idea that we see more Tank Bigsby this year in Jacksonville?
Well, it'll be interesting because last year it was really Dearness Johnson that took away a lot of the work from Travis Etienne. From week 10 to week 18, we saw a dramatic drop for Etienne. I mean, over the first part of the year, if you look at those first 9 weeks of the season, Marcus, Etienne was averaging 72% of the team's rushing attempts, 81% of the snaps. But then you look at week 10, coming off the bye, where they made some adjustments and they gave more work to Dearness Johnson down the stretch. His rushing attempts fell to 63% and his snaps fell to 66%. Still, that's still a running back one workload, guys. You still feel really good about it. But Etienne, like, the thing with him, man, is he just, even though he shows up okay in some of the peripheral stuff, if you look at his 3-year sample or his 2-year sample, last year he was really down in a lot of those efficiency numbers. And so he didn't have the big plays. And he kind of struggled when he wasn't getting like that just huge workload. When he was getting a normal running back one workload, he wasn't really as strong as he had been. He was still fine. He gave you, running back, well, let's see. He gave you top 12 finishes 1, 2, 3, 3 times, down the stretch versus over the first part of the season, he gave you far more. And I think that's what people are worried about. And now you have Doug Peterson coming out and saying the same thing. So of the early part of the season, he gave you 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 top 10 finishes. And he only gave you 3 of those down the stretch. And that coincided with his downturn in workload. So I don't know who they'll give it to. Is it going to be more Tank Bigsby? Well, I think that's really up to Tank Bigsby because I feel like they tried to do that last year and he fumbled inside the 5 right out of the gate early in the season. And Bigsby really just was self-sabotage the whole way. He just made too many mistakes and they couldn't get him on the field. So I will say Bigsby is a guy that goes undrafted, and I have clicked on his name a couple of times. So we'll have to wait and see what happens. But we have heard Doug Peterson on this theme now for 2 years. And it did, to your point, it didn't work out early last year, but they did later in the season, try to relieve Etienne. So I do think there's something to this, but ultimately the backup player still has to come in and take the job. They still have to come in and take those snaps, right? Yeah. If they don't, then it's like what you said. Oh, then the reality hits of, the season's here and the real bullets are flying. We can't trust the guy. And then it's Etienne back out there for 85% of the work.
Well, and I do wonder how much of Doug Peterson saying that out loud was really for the benefit of Tank Bigsby, saying, hey, look, this is your opportunity. Yeah. You've got to be ready for it versus him, telling us like, this is what the plan is. So, sometimes that is how coaches try to get messages across. And so we'll see what that is. And so, I don't know. I may have drafted Bigsby once or twice. I'm not super excited about it. I'm sort of believing that this is Etienne's show until further notice. And then I guess if we have to pivot, then I guess we pivot at some point. Speaking of pivoting, the Chargers offense looks like it is pivoting in a big way now that Jim Harbaugh and Greg Roman are in Los Angeles. Certainly what they have done in free agency and the draft suggests that they want to be a lot more run heavy than they have been previously. So let's kind of figure out how things are going to shake out because Austin Eckler is gone. Gus Edwards is now in town. J.K. Dobbins comes in as well. They draft Kamani Vidal. I think week 1, Gus Edwards is probably your starter. But, Dwayne, I wouldn't be surprised if we see Vidal making a charge at getting some more opportunity by midseason this year.
Yeah, and we've seen Greg Roman and Jim Harbaugh use a committee in the past. So we know they're open to it. We know the skill set of the room says that the most likely path is a committee. But ADP's already pretty sharp on it. Gus Edwards, you're getting, in that round 10, 9, 10 range right now in best ball land. J.K. Dobbins and Kamani Vidal both go multiple rounds later. So honestly, I haven't taken a lot of Edwards. I've really taken more of the other 2 guys. Now Dobbins obviously coming off of, the Achilles injury on top of the other knee injuries that he was already, just finally getting healthy from. Like, we just don't know what he has left in the tank. So Vidal's been my favorite pick. I do have him third, right, in the pecking order here right now, but it's something I'm really looking forward to hearing more about, from mini camps. And then once we get into, from OTAs, and then once we get into mandatory mini camps in early June, it's something that I want to be keeping a pulse on. Like, what does this split look like? Because there's a chance, Marcus, that really, even though ADP is not crazy on Gus Edwards, that it's really closer to a 3-way split between all these guys. And then you're really getting more and more excited about Vidal because, like, who's the guy that could potentially take over by the end of the year? Well, give me the young guy. Give me the young guy that's potentially, fresher. We also know that Vidal is of these guys, J.K. Dobbins has done some nice thing in the passing game, in the past, but Gus Edwards has really been non-existent, but Vidal has been pretty good, like out of the backfield. So he gives you a little bit there as well. So he's the guy I've been taking the most. I think ADP is accurate right now. If you had to say today what the pecking order is, which would be Gus Edwards, J.K. Dobbins, and Vidal.
Yeah, I think I've split up between Edwards and Vidal. I don't think I want to see J.K. Dobbins succeed. I mean, I think he's a guy with incredible talent, and it's been a rough career for him in terms of injuries. But I
Yeah.
just don't have the level of confidence to actually click on his name. So I will watch him and I will root for him, but I don't necessarily want to draft him at any point. Wide receiver. Keenan Allen is gone. He is now in Chicago. Mike Williams is now with the Jets. Josh Palmer remains. They draft Ladd McConkey. Quentin Johnston trying to do something after what was a pretty awful rookie season. They bring in DJ Chark. I will say that of the four of them, Dwayne, the guy that I'm drafting the most is probably McConkey. Maybe some shots at Josh Palmer, one or two late at Quentin Johnston. How have you been approaching this wide receiver room?
This is another wide receiver room where I did not designate a wide receiver 1 on the depth chart. I've got McConkey as a 2, Josh Palmer as a 2, Quentin Johnston as a 3, and then we'll just have to adjust accordingly based on what we're hearing from camp. Obviously, last week, you had the GM come out and say, look, Quentin Johnston was great, against Harbaugh in college, and that's probably still stuck in Harbaugh's head, and they know that he's the guy that can give them the big plays. That you're, as far as the run after the catch, the guy that can stretch the field out. He's just not been able to put all of that together yet. And to your point, like that year 1 was really bad. But Quentin Johnston is the one out of these 3 that the more drafts I do, Marcus, I look and I'm like, I'm probably overconfident that Quentin Johnston is terrible. And I probably need to still, it's not, look, the track record's not great for guys that bust as hard as he did in year 1 when given the chance, especially when his teammates and everyone else get hurt and he still can't come in and accumulate the targets and earn those targets. That's usually a really bad sign, but he's such a young player, still a first round pick. And if one of these guys was to go absolutely bananas this year in a run first offense, what's it going to take? It's going to take some long plays. It's going to take the touchdowns. You could argue Quentin Johnston is still the maybe the best profile of the 3, that if everything went right for the Chargers this year, it might be because Quentin Johnston really is the guy that took that step forward. So I've been trying to be more open to that, but I think right now it's a rotation between those 3 guys, and I think you're going to see a lot of 2 wide receiver sets. Now, McConkey played outside quite a bit at Georgia, more often than he did in the slot. The question will come down that we want to listen to training camp for him is he getting that work outside? And that's going to mean, do Harbaugh and Greg Roman trust him to block because they want to run the ball a lot? Do they trust him as a run blocker? Well, he went to Georgia where he played outside and they like to run the ball a lot. So my guess is, like, even though I know you see all these funny, pictures of Ladd McConkey and he looks like he's like 15 compared to these other guys on the field. Like, I think they felt good about that when they drafted him, but we're going to have to see if that really plays out. So I am with you. If I had to pick today who I like the most, it is Ladd McConkey. But man, I will tell you, round 7 ADP it's pretty rich. That's pretty rich. Round 6, round 7 is where he's going. And so, like, oh man, like Josh Palmer, you can get multiple rounds later. And so I definitely think McConkey offers more ceiling, but I do wonder, like, should McConkey be going like 6 rounds ahead of Josh Palmer? I don't know. 6 or 5 rounds, whatever it is. So I've got them graded out pretty close together, with definitely McConkey with a slight lead. So Palmer's the name I've clicked on the most. I don't love him, but I think he's going to get a lot of playing time this year, and he's been an okay target earner.
Yeah, I mean, I think the reason you're seeing that, and this is not a justification, I think it's just an explanation, is that we've seen Josh Palmer for a couple of years.
Yeah, that's it.
It is. We've seen him, and I think people still sort of believe in Justin Herbert. They just don't believe in Josh Palmer. And so, McConkey's kind of the new guy there. The other thing about Quentin Johnston, I think that's working against him, is there's a whole new regime there that they don't have any real connection to him. New GM, new head coach. I think he can try to work his way back in, but there are no favors given because there's no actually investment from this group into Quentin Johnston himself. Staying in the AFC West, the Raiders, to a lot of people's surprise, drafted Brock Bowers. This comes a year after they draft Michael Mayer. And you asked the question that I have been asking and trying to find an answer to. Uh, is Brock Bowers the tight end one there, or do we see the Raiders go with more 12 personnel and figure out how to get both these guys on the field? I have heard a lot of people say that they expect the Raiders to run more two tight end sets. Are you confident in that? And is that affecting how you approach this group?
I'm not confident in it at all, only because it never happens. So since 2011, and Rob Gronkowski and Aaron Hernandez are the only tight end duo to both reach 70+% route participation. It is very hard to do, and it takes two elite players. So the positive side that says it's possible, Marcus, is the fact that Bowers and Mayer are both top 6 prospects in the rookie supermodel going back to the 2018 class. So we know that they're both talented and they're probably deserving of being on the field. You've got Davante Adams, who's going to play on the outside along with Jacoby Myers. The other thing working here is there's not a wide receiver 3 on the team that's just begging to get on the field. Michael Gallup is really a shell of what he once was, which was never a wide receiver 1 or probably even a wide receiver 2. He always profiled more as a wide receiver 3 to me anyway, even when Gallup was pre-injury form. So I don't think he's forcing his way on. Trey Tucker, I think, is going to get snaps because he's the deep guy. He's the guy that can come on and truly stretch things out and give you the deep shot. But is he really a threat to play that often out of the slot? So I could see this going either way. I think history tells us it's still really tough to get two tight ends on the field. And you know how many times we've heard this. It's kind of like the running back that's going to play slot. Really getting heavy 12 personnel is rare. Like a heavy 12 personnel team, for people, if you want a reference point, like if a team uses two tight ends 35% of their passing plays, that's huge. And so we're talking about a team trying to get to 70%, double that, to get two guys to be really valuable. So no, I have a hard time believing it. But at the same time, I do think the way the roster is constructed and the talent profile of the other two guys, I don't think we can rule it out. I think the biggest thing I want to hear of is, can Brock Bowers just outright go win the job away from Michael Mayer, right, to start the season anyway? And if he can be out there at least 65% of the time to start the season, we could probably live with it. And then maybe he carves out more and more of a workload over the year. But again, that's not a given, because usually it's an old veteran that's standing in the way. And as the other tight end gets better over the year, they take over the job. But this is another young tight end that's still growing. Who's to say Michael Mayer is not the better tight end at week 8, because he's already had a year in the league and he's the guy that steps ahead. I think it's really dicey. Brock Bowers has fallen so much in ADP. I'm now taking my shots on him just in case like Camp Buzz comes out and pushes him back up boards to where I'm not comfortable, because now I'm regularly getting him, Marcus, like, well, I get him past ADP anytime I take him. He's going around like the early 100s, late 90s. But a lot of times you'll get him in a draft like at pick 110, 109, 115. He'll fall a full round. So I got my chip on Bowers to lead this, but man, I don't have a lot of confidence in telling you exactly how this split's going to work.
Yeah, I'm with you. I have started drafting more Bowers, but you talk about having a veteran in front of you. That's kind of what we saw last year in Vegas, where they had Austin Hooper there at the start of the year, and eventually Mayer started to work his way in and get more opportunities. Now this year, you've got Mayer as the second-year player, you've got Bowers as the rookie, the all-world tight end who had such a great college career. And I know for us it's frustrating because we've been hearing about Bowers for a couple of years. I'm looking forward to his landing spot. At the same time, and then we talked about this last year with the supermodel, that Michael Mayer is the greatest receiving tight end in Notre Dame history. That is no small feat. And now here it is. We're wondering whether or not he's going to get on the field and get any real opportunities. So, throw in the fact that they still have Davante Adams and they have Jacoby Myers, and at quarterback is Gardner Minshew, who I'm not sure can support that many options. All of it just seems like a recipe for disappointment for any of us drafting any Raider tight ends this year. In Miami, once again, we have a confusing backfield for the Dolphins, whereas last year we had Raheem Mostert and Jeff Wilson and Devon Achane. This year we've got Raheem Mostert, Devon Achane. I guess Jeff Wilson is still there, but I don't know that we're really concerned with him at the moment. But then they go out and draft Jalen Wright. One of the things that has been a big head scratcher for me, Dwayne, is the gap in ADP between Achan and Mostert. I think those are the two guys that I'm more interested in. Maybe a little bit of Wright later on. Um, can Wright make a dent in this backfield, and is it going to be enough to make us worried about Mostert and Achan?
I I like drafting both players, or sorry, all 3 backs. Not on the same team, obviously, but taking just different shots at all of them. I've got exposure to all of them. Raheem Mostert, the age and everything's there, but he was still explosive last year. And obviously, like if Mostert's anywhere near what he was last year, Marcus, and you're getting him in round 9 of a fantasy draft, like he's gonna crush that. Even if you take away 20% of what he did last year for where you're getting him at ADP, it's gonna be worth it. I'm less worried than other people that Jalen Wright is coming in and like taking work away from these other 2 guys. I think the real question is if Mostert or Achan go down, does that suddenly mean, well, now you don't really get just a backfield to yourself? No, it's just now Jalen Wright is going to get that work. But I don't think that's a given. Again, Jalen Wright's got to be ready. He's got to be ready to take that workload. And so last year, whenever you had Mostert and Achan both healthy, available together, 49% of the rushing attempts went to Mostert, 40% went to Achan, 43% route participation from Mostert, where Achan took the lead in that department at 52%. And Achan had 14% target share in those games, where Mostert was at 8%. You still saw, Mostert get more of the short yardage work, but it was Achan getting a little bit more of the passing down work. So that's kind of how I've plotted it out to start this season. Is the 2 guys pretty, but I've tightened it up. I think Achan steps forward a little bit more. Mostert comes down a little bit more, but I've still got Mostert with a slight lead around the carries, but more passing game work for Achan. But obviously the Achan thing, look, we know his efficiency's got to come down,
Right.
just because it was, it was otherworldly. But I won't be surprised, man, if this guy still averages 5.5, 6 yards per carry. We've seen guys like Jamal Charles and guys like that historically be able to keep up like this really big efficiency. And while we don't think Achan can average, over 7 yards per carry, would it surprise me, if he's in that 5 to 6 range and still scores a lot of touchdowns, makes a lot of big plays? No. So I'm taking swings on all of these guys. Jalen Wright, you're getting in that range where Marshawn Lloyd, guys like that go. So I'm also good with taking him. But I think right now, like I'm just projecting it as a little bit closer split in the carries versus last year, but a slight, Mostert still the slight number 1 back, but Achan obviously the guy that we get the most excited about. Because could you imagine, Marcus, if we did come out and in week 1, we're talking about post utilization, we're doing our utilization debrief, and we're like, guys, Achan got 65% of the carries. And everybody's going to tell you that'll never happen. That'll never happen. He's not big enough. Well, guess what? Everyone said that about Austin Eckler. People used to say that about Jamal Charles. There was a time where people said that about Christian McCaffrey. So we really don't know.
Right.
And we don't know how much weight Achan's put on over the offseason. These guys don't just stay one size. They get bigger. Austin Eckler bulked up like 25 pounds from the time he entered the league. So the people that just brush it off with, oh, he ain't big enough or he's going to be hurt. Like, come on, man. Like we don't know. If Achan did get 60% of the carries in week 1, he would immediately be in the running back 1 overall conversation. So that's why I'm still willing to take him. And right now, people are letting him slip into round 3. That's where I'm taking him. I don't even have to take him in round 2 anymore. I just take him in round 3. And I've seen drafts, Marcus, where Achan has almost slipped to the end of round 3. Not all the time, but I mean, I've been in drafts where people are just anti-Achan right now. And so his ADP is falling.
And I think it is sort of I think it's what I was suggesting, is that the gap between the 2 backs is so big that I think people are starting to, maybe I back off Achan, maybe I just wait for Mostert, but end of round 3, I would definitely take that shot at
I think if you get a shot at Achan anywhere in round 3 right now in best ball drafts, you should take it and then adjust accordingly. If he continues to fall, well, then you can kind of chill out on it. Or if he levels out, and then you can decide, no, I'm going to wait. But anytime you start to get some of these discounts early on, I still buy them, because there's also a real easy chance that as soon as somebody sees one highlight around Achan going nuts, which is going to happen, he's going to move up again. And so I kind of try to balance things that way.
All right, for sure. In New England, Antonio Gibson is now a Patriot. We know they have Ramondre Stevenson, who was sort of a do-everything back for this offense. Does Antonio Gibson take over the passing down duties from Ramondre Stevenson? It never quite happened in Washington, I think, the way we wanted it to. Could it happen in New England?
Yeah, this is scary. Right now, I do have quite a bit of the passing work going to Antonio Gibson, um, and a lot of value for Ramondre Stevenson. Has been attached to his work in the passing game. Marcus, like that's the thing we loved about him so much last year was the fact that this was a guy like targets per route run were really fantastic. The season before wasn't like this downfield kind of threat like a James Cook, but someone in an offense without high-end receivers, which is still a question mark. We'll talk about that one in a second here with the Patriots. But if you get a back that's of Ramondre Stevenson's caliber and you don't have other high-end targets at the wide receiver and tight end game, it can lead to a ton of targets and check down stuff for a running back. But now the question is, will the 2-minute offense go to Antonio Gibson? Will the long down and distance work go to Antonio Gibson? And Mondre took a step back last year in his targets per route run. It went to 19%. The year before, like he had been like around 24%. So it's definitely a question, but I think that ADP is pretty sharp on this one as well. Like Mondre is a guy now, last year you had to take him in around 3 or 4. Well, now Ramondre Stevenson, is a round 6, round 7 pick.
So I guess the Gibson question sort of dovetails into the next question is about the wide receiver group, because they've got a lot of guys there. They don't really seem to have a clear one. I'm going to go out on a limb and say this is another team that you did not have a wide receiver one designation for. They've got Jalen Polk, they've got Demario Douglas, they draft Javon Baker, Kendrick Bourne, KJ Osborne, Juju Smith-Schuster is there. How does this shake out? And could we see them maybe lining Gibson up out? I know we talked about, all the talk about lining wide receiver or running backs out in the slot, but Gibson famously was a wide receiver in college. I mean, could we even throw him into this mix with maybe having some route participation in this offense?
I'll tell you this. I love taking all the Patriots late because they're cheap, A. B, there's a lot of unknown here. It could really go any way. It could be, it wouldn't surprise me if Demario Douglas led the team in targets and nobody wants him. Jalen Polk is my favorite, and you are correct, Marcus. Jalen Polk, I have leading the way as a wide receiver 2. I have Demario Douglas and Kendrick Bourne as wide receiver 3s. I have KJ Osborne and Juju Smith-Schuster as wide receiver 4s, along with Javon Baker. Now, Baker is the other guy, right, that carries that upside. He had a really nice receiving profile in the supermodel. Didn't get a ton of draft capital, but one of these guys, he fell down teams' boards for a few different reasons. But like, there's some potential there with Javon Baker. Like, he could end up being the better guy than Jalen Polk. But my favorite out of this group right now is Jalen Polk. He is my most drafted wide receiver in best ball right now. And a lot of it is, Marcus, I just kind of make it simple. Like, you look at where all of the other round 2 wide receivers in this kind of situation is going. Ladd McConkey is going in round 6, 7. Jalen Polk is going in rounds, what is it right now? I don't even know anymore. 12 or 13 somewhere. Right. He's moved up. He's moved up from where he was. But like, he's still not going anywhere near a lot of those other names. So Jalen Polk is a guy that, man, I've just been drafting him every chance I get because I feel like this is one eventually, and he has been climbing already, but the public wakes up on. And they're like, oh, well, why are we drafting this high-end round 2 wide receiver 5 rounds later than the other round 2 wide receivers or late round 1 wide receivers like Keon Coleman? That is an inefficiency in the marketplace right now. So my advice would be to people, hey, draft Jalen Polk if he climbs to a spot where you're uncomfortable anymore, well, it's still easy just to take Demario Douglas, right, Javon Baker, Kendrick Bourne, recovering from the ACL that happened in the middle of last season. So he's a guy that, might not do much early in the year, but we did see him whenever they didn't have much else to go to. Like, Kendrick Bourne was finally producing, from a fantasy perspective over the last 2 years. So I've occasionally thrown a Kendrick Bourne dart, like with my last round pick, because I think as we get more information, it does sound like he's going to be ready to start the season. So I think he's another guy that can go into that late round mix. I'm not too interested in KJ Osborne or Juju Smith-Schuster, but nothing would surprise me in this receiver room. It's as wide open as it gets. And Jared Mayo said that. He's quote said it's a wide open competition, and there's a big chance for these young guys to take a big step forward and earn significant roles.
He's been very, I think, forthcoming about what's happening there. He mentions a wide open competition. I think his take on Drake May is that he has a lot of things to work on. So, he's not driving a hype train this offseason. I think he's
Feels
being very level
Antonio
headed.
Pierce-ish. Like, Pierce is really straightforward like that
Yeah,
is too. Just like, "We're just gonna play our best players." Like,
right.
it does feel like he kinda has that same mantra for, like, his coach speak, the way he talks about it.
Which I'm cool with that. I can
Me
get
too.
down with that for sure. With the Jets, Breece Hall, obviously the RB1. Who is his primary backup? Is it Israel Abanikanda, who was there last year? They draft Braylon Allen. They have Isaiah Davis. Who's the guy that you would want as that handcuff option?
This is the one I have no clue on, man. But we need to know. And the answer might be there's not a clear handcuff. It's gonna be some rotation of these guys. They've invested draft capital in all 3 of them, which I just thought was, like, interesting. Like, did they really need to take Isaiah Davis? Number 1, we kinda like Isaiah Davis, and we're like, "Really? He has to land in the exact same spot that Braylon Allen's at behind Breece Hall?" I mean, we'd like to see Isaiah Davis get, a better opportunity than that, but it's hard to say, man. It won't surprise me if it's any one of these. I won't be surprised if it's all of them. So I haven't really messed with this one much in best ball. Even with my last round pick, I was getting a Banacanda like early on, but then once the draft happened, I was just kind of backed off. And we're gonna have to monitor camp. Like, this is one we definitely want to get more information on.
Yeah. I, I I think I've been leaning toward Allen, but that might just be recency bias, with him being drafted this year, and you mentioned spending draft capital on him, but I think it's fair to say that there's no clear cut answer. And it could just be that Breece, ends up dominating so much of the snaps that maybe it doesn't even matter in the end anyway. Couple things in Pittsburgh here. Arthur Smith, obviously now the offensive coordinator there after being let go in Atlanta. Najee Harris, Jalen Warren, it was about a 50-50 split. It was about as close to a 50-50 split as you could get with those two guys last year. Do you think it's going to be the same, or will we get some Arthur Smith shenanigans this year?
Well, I think it's hard to say anything like you mentioned with Arthur Smith. We don't know. It's going to be a split backfield. Like, how he's going to split the work up, though, like, remains to be seen. I think they're both fine at ADP. You're getting Najee Harris, right now in round 8 of fantasy drafts. Jalen Warren goes a little bit later than him in round 8. It's hard to get it past like the Kansas City Chief drafters now. Whoever takes Mahomes and then turns around and takes Xavier Worthy, and then they get Marquise Brown. It's staring them right in the face now. That my week 17 correlation is the Steelers. So they're taking one of Najee or Jalen Warren. And I've done it too. So like, I'm guilty of the same thing. Used to, you would see some of them slip a little bit further, but since the schedule's been released, like it's hard for them to get past that middle of round 8. But it's a true unknown. I still prefer Jalen Warren, just because I feel like if somehow things go his way, he's the more explosive player.
Yeah.
If I had to pick today who I think is going to get more touches, I would say it's Najee. But if I had to tell you, okay, if everything worked out for you, which one of these guys could win your league for you, I think it's Jalen Warren. And Najee, if he gets a big workload, I mean, for a round 8 pick, like, he could still perform more like what should be a round 3 or round 4 fantasy pick. So like, they both offer a lot of value in my opinion. But I'm with you. I think I've got it pretty closely split between the two. I've got a slight lead to Najee Harris right now on the early down work, which is giving him more of the carries. But I've got Jalen Warren on the field playing more of the passing, getting more of those passing down duties.
Yeah, I mean, I have tended to lean more toward Warren. I've drafted Harris. I think I've drafted more of Warren. Those guys are going pretty close to each other too in drafts. I think everybody sort of feels that
Warren, man,
it really could go one way or another there.
28% targets per route run last year,
Mm.
23% over his first 2 seasons. That's elite. That is
Yeah.
high end running back 1 material. If you look at him, from an efficiency standpoint, he also checks all these boxes. Now, anytime you're dealing with a guy like Warren, you're dealing with a little bit of a smaller sample, but because his workload increased last year, I think we can feel a little bit more confident, about it, Marcus. Like, he actually, last year got almost to that 150 carry threshold we look for. He was at 149. So essentially, I put him in. That's the threshold I'm looking at. So I went ahead and included him in all my 150 plus analysis for the offseason because he was only 1 carry away. But man, missed tackles force per attempt, 0.36, man. That's better than anyone ahead of him on this list. 3.6 yards after contact. The NFL average is 2.9. On missed tackles forced per attempt, the average is 0.17. Again, he was at 0.36. 16% of his carries went for 10 plus yards.
Wow.
The NFL average is 9%. So this is just a guy that, even though his workload expanded, like he continued looking like he did the season before. And that gets me really excited. If Najee were to go down, or they just suddenly decided Jaylen Warren's really our better guy and we just want to play him more, man, Jaylen Warren, he has running back one skill set. Like he has running back one traits.
So you mentioned his targets per route run. Speaking of targets, there's George Pickens, and then there's the rest of the pass catcher group. They go out and they draft Roman Wilson, but is there anybody you see that's really going to challenge Pickens for targets now that Deontay Johnson is gone?
Well, you got Roman Wilson, who comes in, in third round of the draft. He's a vertical slot player, which is a nice fit historically with Russell Wilson. Not as much lately because the way teams are playing that two deep shell all the time. But Roman Wilson, and then you've got Pat Freiermuth. Those are the two biggest. That's the competition for the targets, and who you mentioned, Jaylen Warren, we just talked about. So I feel really good, man, about George Pickens. I've been talking him up quite a bit. He is starting to climb, up draft boards. Used to, you could get him falling into round 5, like sometimes towards the middle or end of round 5. I've noticed people now more willing to take him as a early wide receiver in round 4. I've seen people taking him ahead of Tank Dell. I've seen people taking him ahead of Amari Cooper. I've got him ranked ahead of both of those players. So George Pickens is my third most drafted wide receiver. I've slowed down now because now his price is going up. I'd still be willing to buy, but I want to see what happens. But yeah, man, 26% target share on plays without Deontay Johnson over the last 2 years. That's elite, man. That's a wide receiver one, even if you've got struggling quarterback play on a team that we know is going to want to run the ball plenty with Arthur Smith and Mike Tomlin at the helm. So I think there's going to be systemic challenges with the offense because of the questions we have around quarterback and the play calling. But man, like anytime you have a guy that have a 25% target share and one that can score touchdowns the way George Pickens can, he definitely has to have your attention, Marcus. I don't see a way to keep him out of your top 24 wide receivers. Like I just don't see how people can do it.
No, I don't think so either. Especially look, I know Russell Wilson is not the guy that he was in those years in Seattle. I still think it's a better option than what we had with Kenny Pickett there in Pittsburgh the last couple of years. And if things go sideways, I guess Justin Fields steps in. Either way, I think those are better options than what Pickens was working with previously. Last one, down in Tennessee. I think a lot of people were surprised that the Titans went and added Tony Pollard after losing Derrick Henry, mostly because Tyjae Spears was already there, who does a lot of similar things. So do you see this as being a 1A, 1B deal down there for the Titans, or will one of these guys step forward and end up taking more of the opportunity?
Yeah, I think this is another one, like a lot of these, this is why we're so excited. People are like, why are you guys excited about OTAs and mini camps? To get as much information as we can for you guys on these sort of scenarios, because we don't know. The original coach speak and GM speak was very strong, around, Tyjae Spears right at the end of the year. And Tyjae Spears was a really good player last year. He's one of these guys that it's kind of like Jaylen Warren, really, Marcus, when you look at what he did from an efficiency standpoint. And then they go out and they sign Tony Pollard to, not a huge contract, but compared to other running backs, it's a pretty decent contract that Tony Pollard got. So and then the original Coach Speak after that, and thank you, Coach Speak Index. They did a great job covering this, after the signings happened, just keeping track. If you guys don't follow Coach Speak Index on Twitter, what are you doing? You need to. Really great account. And it just talked about, it sounded a little more like a 1A, 1B kind of conversation, right? Like both guys are going to be out there. So that's the way I've split it up for now, Marcus, with Tony Pollard in the slight lead because they did bring him in. They did pay him. And Pollard last year, I know the efficiency came down, but he was dealing with the injury, so there's always a chance he comes out this year and he looks more like the Tony Pollard that we used to love, right? In Dallas before he disappointed us all last season. And if that happens, that was still better than what we saw from Tyjae Spears last year, as good as it was. Now, Tyjae Spears, I mentioned it, him being like Jaylen Warren, missed tackles forced per attempt. This was on 100 attempts, so he didn't get near that 150 threshold. Small sample alert here, but 26%, so 0.26 yards after contact, 3.2. Those are the two stats that we know running backs own. That's the more sticky stat that works year over year. It doesn't always mean a lot of fantasy points, but if you get more carries and you're good at those things, theoretically, right, you've got a better ceiling than someone that doesn't. And 13% of his carries went for 10 plus yards. Again, the NFL average is 9%. So I like drafting both of these guys. Pollard, you're getting in round 8. Tajay Spears, you're getting a couple of rounds after that. So I'm fine drafting either or for my best ball teams, but one that we're definitely going to have to continue to listen to. It wouldn't surprise me if it ends up being tighter than that. Yeah. Right. Where maybe there shouldn't be a 2 or a 3 round difference in their ADP. Maybe they should really be going back to back in like round 10 and round 11. So Spears is the one I take more often, Marcus, just because he is the cheaper of the two right now.
Yeah, no, that's kind of where I fall on it too. I think I wouldn't be surprised if we see their ADPs get similar to what we've seen with Najee Harris and Jalen Warren, where they really are going within a few picks of each other in a lot of situations.
Yeah. Brian Robinson, Austin Eckler is another similar one where I feel like this situation should probably be priced closer to that.
Yeah.
Right. And I think the reason people don't is because the similarities and skill sets for Tajay Spears and Tony Pollard. Whereas if you look at the others, I think people feel comfortable because they're like, okay, Najee going to get the early down work. I know that, at least Jalen Warren's going to get most of that passing down work. And then you see the same thing. Oh, Eckler will be the passing down guy. Brian Robinson will be the early down guy. But then they get to a situation like this. And I think because there's so much overlap, because they're both good receivers out of the backfield, they both have that explosive playmaking ability. I think it can lead people to think, well, they don't have neither one have a clear role. So, that creates a bigger gap between the two. And I don't necessarily know that that's like the best way to think about it. When you have guys that are diverse like this, that's also more ways for them to just be on the field, and they could make them interchangeable, right? It doesn't have to be, oh, you get this kind of role, you get this kind of role. It could be, no, we're just going to rotate you two guys, and we're going to rotate you evenly. That can still easily happen. And so, yeah, I'm with you. I think they should be more similar to those other two situations, even though like their skill set has all this overlap.
Yeah, 100%. And like I was in on Spears last year, kind of as a late round opportunity, figuring that, look, if something happened to Derrick Henry, or even just because he catches the football, had a role, I'm not backing away from him, even though Tony Pollard is there, and his ADP has been slightly better. So that's kind of where I've gone more often than not with him. So.
I will say Tajay Spears, I feel way more confident in as a player than Chase Brown, who we talked about earlier and we like. But like Chase Brown showed some flashes last year, but Tajay Spears really, on a better sample size, did a lot of different things really well. Yeah. Like, and they go like right next to each other in drafts. And so, depending on the way I'm stacking teams and all that kind of stuff, like I still click on Chase Brown, but if it was just in a vacuum and you were making me click on Chase Brown versus Tajay Spears, I don't think I would ever be able to click on Chase Brown. Like I would probably be clicking Tajay nearly every time.
Yeah. No, 100%. So I'm definitely big in on that as well. By the way, you mentioned Tony Pollard too. I mean, last year I know it was disappointing. If a couple of those goal line opportunities if they turn into touchdowns, then I think we're looking at him completely differently this year versus what it turned out being last year. But
another round 8 guy. I mean, he goes right around Najee and Jalen Warren. So I think the price is still fine on Pollard. I'm with you. I'm surprised they're not closer together.
Yeah. So anyway, that's our look at the AFC. Next week, we will dive into the NFC. I'm sure plenty of questions there as we try to dive. I mean, we already mentioned Washington with Eckler and Robinson. That's one I'm sure we'll try to dive into as well next week. But in the meantime, that's plenty for you guys to digest. Go over, though, to fantasylife.com. You can check out the rankings, check out all the content we have there, whether it's redraft leagues, best ball, sports betting, whatever you want. We got it for you over there. And as I always mention, sign up for the newsletter if you haven't already. But in the meantime, that'll do it for this edition of the Utilization Report Debrief. For Dwain McFarland, I'm Marcus Grant. Thanks to James Lynch for putting this all together for us. Enjoy the week, everybody, and we'll talk to you again real soon.